Tiene que haber miles de ellos.
Afrontaremos la muerte y defenderemos el hogar.
For us, it really started with the opportunity to let players feel like they were a samurai, this sort of legendary warrior carrying this, wonderfully beautiful weapon, and the sense of duty conflicted against a war was really interesting.
Con honor. Mi honor murió en la playa. El Khan merece sufrir.
He left the Second Son experience, and we really spent a lot of our time talking about wanting to do a game that was melee based. We really thought that was an area we had never really explored as creators, and we were fascinated by it. We were also thinking about where we wanted to specifically make the game, and the game director, Nate Fox, and really a number of us are longtime fans of samurai cinema, of Kurosawa's work. And so that whole thing kind of really came together for us. And I think at the moment we found the historical moment where the Mongol army had invaded Tsushima in 1274, I think we really felt like, okay, there it is. That was that moment where once we found that, we were sure we'd found the right thing. And it was sort of the moment of inspiration, all of that coming together to go make this game.
Al luchar, enfrentamos al enemigo. Y al quitarle la vida, le miramos a los ojos, con coraje y respeto.
The character of Jin is, as you suggest, it's not sort of a traditional hero archetype. But I do think that what he really is somebody who is maybe discovering a new way. He sees the world differently than the traditional way. In some ways, I think he probably sees it more like you or I might see the world. And I think that's kind of the interesting tension in that character, is that he is living, hundreds of years ago, but in a lot of ways, the way that I think he thinks about things might be more modern. And so for me, that was always the most interesting aspect of Jin's character. The most interesting part for us about Jin is that he is, sort of in tension between the old traditional ways and what he has to do to save the island. And those two things are in conflict. And he's sorting his way out. If you're playing through the game and you're sort of in the middle, you'll see that Jin actually doesn't have an easy time of that. He still very much respects his uncle, and he's been, born and steeped in this traditional way. But then at the same time, he has his own ideas, and those two things have to be sorted out as you continue to play. Jin will work his way through those problems. We really want and believe that Ghost is a game that really is almost best played, very wide. You want to go on broad adventures, and yet we have a very important central narrative to tell. And what that means is that as we worked on the game and as we continued to refine it, it really meant often that we had to just continue to simplify the main threads of the story to make sure it didn't get too complicated or too confusing, because, as you say, people might be playing along that story and then they may take a number of hours and go off, and when they come back, it can't be so complex that that players will have lost track of some of the subtle details. So yeah, there's a layer of balance that's applied to the main story. In addition, you want to make sure a lot of those side quests then point back to or reference the things that are going on in the main quest, so that you continue the player's kind of through line. Even some of the chatter in the towns, the pedestrians will have lines that are intended to kind of remind you and keep you fresh on what's going on in the main quest. So all of that helps keep the player tracking the main story. We have the unique position of being both an American developer, but then part of a Japanese company at Sony. And so, yes, I do think we bring our own and certainly Western point of view to this. But I think it's also backstopped, and we've been supported throughout the entire journey by the tremendous team in Tokyo who have worked alongside us to make sure that we understood the details, and that we were really, they really helped us do a great job of capturing the important cultural and historical truths there. So, it's always been a balance. We recognize that samurai cinema, even the genre, has always been evolving and updated, and to some extent, yes, it is a Western take on that. But I do think the team in Sony Japan has really helped us a lot. The beauty and the sort of minimalist aesthetics are something that I think you'll see. Not just, the environments are obviously quite beautiful, but the minimalist aesthetic even informs some of the stuff we've tried to do in terms of not having lots of UI, and all of that, I think for me is the things that I connect to most strongly with the culture. The wind came from Kurosawa. I mean, you see those games, there's always movement, there's so much wind in those games. Now, using it for wayfinding was something that came after that. We had already worked on and built a system that allowed us to have all of this wind. And at some point, maybe, in the first year or two again, we started doing some experiments with, could this actually lead you through the world? And again, when you think about that minimalist aesthetic, that idea of using a bird or using an animal or using the wind, those things all felt like that was the correct direction for us to go almost intuitively. You see it and you're like, okay, that feels right. And obviously it took a lot of time to sort of get the details right. But I think that they radiate from the center of what we had hoped to achieve with the game. We were comfortable letting the game have more what we would call negative space or open space than you might see in other games. And again, I don't think it's empty by any stretch, but we really wanted to make sure that you were constantly moving in and out between different fields. And there are two reasons that I would emphasize that we made that choice. The first is that again, that simplicity, that negative space is part of the aesthetic of the game, that we want to make sure that there's room for the game to breathe, for the environments or the weather or the animals that you might see to shine through, and you don't want to constantly be engaged. But even more importantly, one of the reasons that we were found that made sense is that this is a wartime epic. And so you're not expecting a bustling town, but in fact, people are in hiding, or people have been lost their lives, and the village is empty. And so you want to make sure that the game doesn't feel like, we did Seattle for Second Son, and we were always trying to make it feel very live and vibrant. Here, there's a sadness to the emptiness that reinforces the themes of the game, and all of that is part of how we wanted the game to feel as a player when you're moving through it. So, we absolutely made a conscious choice to have that kind of moving between spaces that were occupied or crowded, and then through spaces that were more natural or were empty for maybe it's burned down buildings. But again, we weren't trying to put enemies around every corner. You want to have that ebb and flow in terms of the feel. We thought about doing melee-based game very early on, and so we began this project prototyping different styles of combat, different ways that we wanted it to feel, and some of the core design points where we wanted to make sure that you could, maybe if you were facing 1, 2, or 3 enemies all at once, it would be okay, you could handle it, but then at 4, 5, and 6, it would start to get to the point where you may have to, exit and abandon the encounter and reapproach it, or, maybe it would be too difficult. And so we spent a lot of time in that loop, trying to make sure that the basics worked well, and where to add richness so that the player could feel like they had a lot of agency. They were changing stances, they were using different weapons, different attacks, but it wasn't so complicated that it would be really difficult for a wide range of players. And so, that effort was for the entirety of the project, we've been working on these details. I guess the real history of the project is all the things we tried that failed. Many attempts, and eventually you find a really good combination of, again, the stances, the quickfire weapons, the bow and the ranged weapons, and of course all of the katana attacks. The thing that I'm the most proud of, I think, is the way the game makes you feel. That for me, and I think for a lot of players, you really do feel transported. You feel like you've been given this opportunity to live out a different life, to play this role as a samurai in feudal Japan. And so that transportative quality, I think, is the thing I'm the most proud of.